Chapter 13. Natural Rights. The natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth, and not to be under the will or legislative authority of man, but only to have the law of nature for his rule. Samuel Adams, 1772. Dear Chris, this system of law we have been talking about is sometimes called natural law. The American founders believed the moral laws that govern humans are a subset of the natural laws that govern the universe. Where these moral laws are widely obeyed, life gets better. Where they are not, life gets worse. It's cause and effect, like the laws of physics and chemistry. Common law was the system for discovering and applying natural law in human affairs. An important point here concerns good intentions. You might have heard the expression, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." If you jump out of an airplane without a parachute, you know what will happen. It's cause and effect. Even if you have the best of intentions, even if you are absolutely convinced you can fly like a bird, it won't make any difference. Your intentions cannot repeal natural law. Cause and effect also exists with natural moral laws. When force or fraud enter a transaction, odds are that someone will suffer a loss and civilization will move slightly backward. Intentions do not matter. Suppose John Q. Citizen is totally convinced that some group of people is in need, and John Q. Citizen is therefore entitled to take your money by force to give it to them. John Q. Citizen could launch an effort to set up a private charity to help these people using voluntary means, but let's say he is convinced their need makes the use of force okay. John Q. Citizen launches a political campaign to persuade the government to take your money and give it to the needy. In this case, we will say these needy persons are a large corporation that is going broke and will have to lay off its employees if it isn't rescued. John Q. Citizen's intentions won't matter. When the money is taken by force, a large number of people, you included, will suffer losses. Those who suffer will respond. They will now spend much of their time and money trying to avoid these losses. Some will do this legally, engaging in tax avoidance. They will hire accountants, lawyers, and financial advisors to find tax loopholes for them. Vast amounts of time, effort, and wealth will be diverted to unproductive money shuffling. Others will do it illegally with tax evasion. They will spend time, effort, and money searching for secret, illegal ways to escape the taxes. The government will retaliate by expanding the tax bureaucracy to catch them. Some will go to prison, and prisons are expensive. More vast sums of money will be diverted to unproductive activity. Losses will multiply, and civilization will move backward. Somewhere, somehow, poverty will increase. It's cause and effect. The needy corporation and its employees will be better off, and this will be highly visible because this group will be concentrated in a single location. John Q. Citizen will boast about being their benefactor. But thousands of others will be worse off, although they will be widely scattered and not noticeable. The fact that they are not noticeable will enable John to brag and get away with it. But despite appearances, civilization will be held back. Here is an interesting remark by Thomas Paine made in 1792. To say that any people are not fit for freedom is to make poverty their choice, and to say they had rather be loaded with taxes than not. Notice Paine is saying that without freedom, poverty is automatic. Economists today know this is because of economic calculation. When force or fraud enter a transaction, odds are that someone will suffer a loss. This is how the universe is made, and we cannot change it, just like the laws of physics and chemistry. From this theory of natural law came the early Americans' belief in the natural rights of the individual. Samuel Adams said, "The natural rights of the colonists are these. First, a right to life. Second, to liberty. Third, to property, together with the right to support and defend them in the best manner they can. Because the law that says do not encroach is a natural law made by the Creator, a person has natural rights to his life, liberty, and property granted by the Creator. They are a logical extension, the founders believed. Samuel Adams did an outstanding job of explaining this in his excellent 1772 essay, The Rights of the Colonists. I suggest you read it. All men are by nature equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights, of which, when they enter into a state of society, they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their posterity, namely, the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. Virginia Declaration of Rights, 1776. Chris, an interesting point here is that the early Americans were very likely the most law-abiding people ever, if we are talking about common law, but if political law, they were rebels from the start. They came to America specifically to violate the tariffs, trade restrictions, taxes, and religious laws of the government. Virtually every colonist disobeyed these laws. In fact, disobedience to them was the foundation of the economy. Few American industries could have survived if they had paid all the taxes and obeyed all the regulations. John Hancock was known as the Prince of Smugglers. But the early Americans were dedicated to the principles of common law. At Lexington, Concord, and other battlefields, hundreds gave their lives for these principles. To my mind, the very best definition of liberty ever written was by Jefferson. Rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to our will within limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. I do not add within the limits of the law, because law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of the individual. Obviously, Jefferson pulled that definition straight from the second fundamental law: do not encroach on other persons or their property. Chris, in my next letter, we will continue our discussion of natural law. Until then, remember the founders' belief in natural law, and that a person is endowed by his Creator with the rights to his life, liberty, and property. Uncle Eric. Natural rights provided the most moral, philosophic underpinning for the U.S. Declaration of Independence. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, natural rights fell into disfavor with legal philosophers. Natural rights theory was largely replaced with legal positivism. Positivism holds that legal authority stems solely from what the state has laid down as law. However, the flaw in positivist philosophy is that the law is no better than the source of its authority. In the aftermath of World War II, a revival of natural rights theory emerged. It was due in part to the revulsion against Nazism, which revealed the horrors that could emanate from a positivist system. Attorney Jerome J. Shestack, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN Commission on Human Rights. There's nothing alien about natural rights. Wall Street Journal, September 6, 1991. Chapter 14. The Human Ecology. No arbitrary regulation, no act of the legislature can add anything to the capital of the country. It can only force it into artificial channels. J. R. McCulloch, Economist, 1789 to 1864. Principles of Political Economy. Dear Chris, an economy is an ecology. It's not a machine. It's a biological system like a forest or tropical reef, but far more complex. The network of relationships is intricate and fragile. Forcible intervention does damage. Even if the force is applied with the best of intentions, damage happens. As in a forest or tropical reef, the consequences of force might not be apparent in the exact location where the force is applied, but it pops up somewhere. You learned this from my previous group of letters about money, inflation, investment cycles, and recessions. The legal tender laws have brought America untold hardship, including recessions, depressions, unemployment, and deprivation. The more government we get, the more poverty we get. The two fundamental laws are part of the fabric of the universe, like the laws of physics and chemistry. Where these laws are violated, life gets worse. Where they are obeyed, life gets better. It's cause and effect. Let not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let him work diligently and build one for himself, thus by example assuring that his own one shall be safe from violence when built. Abraham Lincoln. Violators, of course, always hope to avoid the consequences themselves, but someone somewhere pays. Common law was an attempt to ensure that the only person who pays is the person who obeyed. The idea was to protect civilization by preventing the damage from being dispersed, by concentrating it at the point, the individual who committed the violation. Sometimes, I think the connection between law and economics was better understood 200 years ago than it is today. Former U.S. Assistant Attorney General Charles Warren once drew attention to the sequence of instruction at Harvard Law School in its first decade, 1817 to 27. Harvard introduced students to law through the works of William Blackstone, then taught them economics. First law, then economics. As I said in my first letter, economics is only a symptom. The cause is law. Today, knowledge of this connection between law and economics has been almost completely lost. People study either law or economics, but rarely both. Even more rarely are they shown how the two are intertwined. Now that you know, I hope you will tell others about economic calculation. Let me emphasize something that should be obvious but is often ignored. Humans are biological organisms. We are like forest creatures, whales, and all the rest. Our natural system for survival is not an ocean or a rainforest. It is an economy, but an economy is an ecological system every bit as much as these others. Chris, common law was the system for discovering the natural law that governs the human ecology. We can learn this law, obey it, and reap the rewards, or ignore it, our choice. But it's always there, producing its inevitable results. Keep in mind that right and wrong are not matters of opinion. They are principles we must discover and apply. They are the laws of biology for intelligent species. By the way, in a future letter, I'll explain how our refusal to use common law has led to the destruction of forests, reefs, and other ecological systems. When humans do not obey the two fundamental laws, they foul not only their own ecology, but the ecologies of other creatures too. Uncle Eric. P.S. In my next letter, I'll enclose a treat. A classic story called I, Pencil. A two-sided coin. The system of liberty is a two-sided coin. Common law was the legal side, and free markets are the economic side. In a free market, people can produce and sell whatever goods and services they choose. What guides them to produce what others need? The desire for gain. In his book, The Wealth of Nations, the great economist Adam Smith explained that business persons earn money by offering goods others wish to buy. To earn more, they must constantly improve these goods so that the goods are in greater demand. This is the so-called invisible hand that guides free markets to produce what people need. By directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain. He is, in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. Chapter 15. How Things Get Done. Dear Chris, under the principles of common law, how do people organize themselves? How do things get done? By applying the first law, they use voluntary agreements. One individual's simple offer, "If you will do this for me, I will do that for you," and another's answer, "I agree." The best explanation ever written was by Leonard Read of the Foundation for Economic Education. His essay, "I, Pencil," is a classic. Enjoy. Uncle Eric. I, Pencil by Leonard E. Read. Reprinted by permission of the Foundation for Economic Education, Incorporated, Irvington-on-Hudson, New York, 10533. To summarize the philosophy of freedom and marvel at the results, one must wonder at the mystery of the creation of so simple an item as a lead pencil. Here is a pencil's story as told to Leonard Read in 1958. The pencil's official name is Mongol 482. Its many ingredients are assembled, fabricated, and finished in Eberhard Faber Pencil Company, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I am a lead pencil, the ordinary wooden pencil familiar to all boys and girls and adults who can read and write. Writing is both my vocation and my avocation. That's all I do. You may wonder why I should write a genealogy. Well, to begin with, my story is interesting. And next, I am a mystery, more so than a tree or a sunset or even a flash of lightning. But sadly, I am taken for granted by those who use me, as if I were a mere incident and without background. This supercilious attitude relegates me to the level of the commonplace. This is a species of the grievous error in which mankind cannot too long persist without peril. For the wise G.K. Chesterton observed, "We are perishing for want of wonder, not for want of wonders." I, Pencil, simple though I appear to be, merit your wonder and awe, a claim I shall attempt to prove. In fact, if you can understand me, no, that's too much to ask of anyone. If you can become aware of the miraculousness which I symbolize, you can help save the freedom mankind is so unhappily losing. I have a profound lesson to teach, and I can teach this lesson better than can an automobile or an airplane or a mechanical dishwasher because I am seemingly so simple. Simple. Yet not a single person on the face of this earth knows how to make me. This sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Especially when it is realized that there are about 1.5 billion of my kind produced in the USA each year. Pick me up and look me over. What do you see? Not much meets the eye. There's some wood, lacquer, the printed labeling, graphite lead, a bit of metal, and an eraser. Innumerable antecedents. Just as you cannot trace your family tree back very far, so it is impossible for me to name and explain all of my antecedents. But I would like to suggest enough of them to impress upon you the richness and complexity of my background. My family tree begins with what is in fact a tree, a cedar of straight grain that grows in Northern California and Oregon. Now, contemplate all the saws and trucks and rope and the countless other gear used in harvesting and carting the cedar logs to the railroad siding. Think of all the persons and the numberless skills that went into their fabrication, the mining of ore, the making of steel and its refinement into saws, axes, motors, the growing of hemp and bringing it through all the stages to heavy and strong rope, the logging camps with their beds and mess halls, the cookery and the raising of all the foods. Why, untold thousands of persons had a hand in every cup of coffee the loggers drink. The logs are shipped to a mill in San Leandro, California. Can you imagine the individuals who make flat cars and rails and railroad engines and who construct and install the communication systems incidental thereto? These legions are among my antecedents. Consider the millwork in San Leandro. The cedar logs are cut into small, pencil-length slats, less than 1/4 of an inch in thickness. These are kiln-dried and then tinted for the same reason women put rouge on their faces. People prefer that I look pretty, not a pallid white. The slats are waxed and kiln dried again. How many skills went into the making of the tint and the kilns, into supplying the heat, the light and power, the belts, motors, and all the other things a mill requires? Sweepers in the mill among my ancestors? Yes, and included are the men who poured the concrete for the dam of a Pacific Gas and Electric Company hydro plant which supplies the mill's power. Don't overlook the ancestors present and distant who have a hand in transporting 60 carloads of slats across the nation from California to Wilkes Barre. Complicated machinery. Once in the pencil factory, $4 million in machinery and building, all capital accumulated by thrifty and saving parents of mine. Each slat is given 8 grooves by a complex machine, after which another machine lays leads in every other slat, applies glue, and places another slat atop. A lead sandwich, so to speak. 7 brothers and I are mechanically carved from this wood-clinched sandwich. My lead itself, it contains no lead at all, is complex. The graphite is mined in Sri Lanka. Consider these miners, and those who make their many tools, and the makers of the paper sacks in which the graphite is shipped, and those who make the string that ties the sacks, and those who put them aboard ships, and those who make the ships. Even the lighthouse keepers along the way assisted in my birth, and the harbor pilots. The graphite is mixed with clay from Mississippi, in which ammonium hydroxide is used in the refining process. Then wetting agents are added, such as sulfonated tallow, animal fats chemically reacted with sulfuric acid. After passing through numerous machines, the mixture finally appears as endless extrusions, as from a sausage grinder, cut to size, dried, and baked for several hours at 1,850 degrees Fahrenheit. To increase their strength and smoothness, the leads are then treated with a hot mixture, which includes candelia wax from Mexico, paraffin wax, and hydrogenated natural fats. My cedar receives 6 coats of lacquer. Do you know all of the ingredients of lacquer? Who would think that the growers of castor beans and the refiners of castor oil are a part of it? They are. Why, even the processes by which the lacquer is made a beautiful yellow involve the skills of more persons than one can enumerate. Observe the labeling. That's a film formed by applying heat to carbon black mixed with resins. How do you make resins, and what, pray, is carbon black? My bit of metal, the ferrule, is brass. Think of all the persons who mine zinc and copper, and those who have the skills to make shiny sheet brass from those products of nature. Those black rings on my ferrule are black nickel. What is black nickel, and how is it applied? The complete story of why the center of my ferrule has no black nickel on it would take pages to explain. Then there's my crowning glory, inelegantly referred to in the trade as the plug, the part man uses to erase the errors he makes with me. An ingredient called factus is what does the erasing. It is a rubber-like product made by reacting rapeseed oil from the Dutch East Indies with sulfur chloride. Rubber, contrary to the common notion, is only for binding purposes. Then, too, there are numerous vulcanizing and accelerating agents. The pumice comes from Italy, and the pigment which gives the plug its color is cadmium sulfide. No one knows. Does anyone wish to challenge my earlier assertion that no single person on the face of this earth knows how to make me? Actually, millions of human beings have had a hand in my creation, no one of whom even knows more than a very few of the others. Now, you may say that I go too far in relating the picker of a coffee berry in far-off Brazil and food growers elsewhere to my creation, that this is an extreme position. I shall stand by my claim. There isn't a single person in all these millions, including the president of the pencil company, who contributes more than a tiny, infinitesimal bit of know-how. From the standpoint of know-how, the only difference between the miner of graphite in Sri Lanka and the logger in Oregon is in the type of know-how. Neither the miner nor the logger can be dispensed with, any more than can the chemist at the factory or the worker in the oil field, paraffin being a byproduct of petroleum. Here is an astounding fact. Neither the worker in the oil field, nor the chemist, nor the digger of graphite or clay, nor any who mans or makes the ships or trains or trucks, nor the one who runs the machine that does the knurling on my bit of metal, nor the president of the company performs his singular task because he wants me. Each one wants me less, perhaps, than does a child in the first grade. Indeed, there are some among this vast multitude who never saw a pencil, nor would they know how to use one. Their motivation is other than me. Perhaps it is something like this. Each of these millions sees that he can thus exchange his tiny know-how for the goods and services he needs or wants. I may or may not be among these items. No mastermind. There is a fact still more astounding, the absence of a mastermind, of anyone dictating or forcibly directing these countless actions which bring me into being. No trace of such a person can be found. Instead, we find the invisible hand at work. This is the mystery to which I earlier referred. It has been said that only God can make a tree. Why do we agree with this? Isn't it because we realize that we ourselves could not make one? Indeed, can we even describe a tree? We cannot, except in superficial terms. We can say, for instance, that a certain molecular configuration manifests itself as a tree. But what mind is there among men that could even record, let alone direct, the constant changes in molecules that transpire in the lifespan of a tree? Such a feat is utterly unthinkable. I, pencil, am a complex combination of miracles. A tree, zinc, copper, graphite, and so on. But to these miracles which manifest themselves in nature, an even more extraordinary miracle has been added. The configuration of creative human energies, millions of tiny know-hows configurating naturally and spontaneously in response to human necessity and desire, and in the absence of any human masterminding. Since only God can make a tree, I insist that only God could make me. Man can no more direct these millions of know-hows to bring me into being than he can put molecules together to create a tree. The above is what I meant when writing, if you can become aware of the miraculousness which I symbolize, you can help save the freedom mankind is so unhappily losing. For if one is aware that these know-hows will naturally, yes, automatically arrange themselves into creative and productive patterns in response to human necessity and demand, that is, in the absence of governmental or any other coercive masterminding, then one will possess an absolutely essential ingredient for freedom, a faith in free men. Freedom is impossible without this faith. Once government has had a monopoly of a creative activity, such, for instance, as the delivery of the mails, most individuals will believe that the mails could not be efficiently delivered by men acting freely. And here is the reason. Each one acknowledges that he himself doesn't know how to do all the things incident to mail delivery. He also recognizes that no other individual could do it. These assumptions are correct. No individual possesses enough know-how to perform a nation's mail delivery, any more than any individual possesses enough know-how to make a pencil. Now, in the absence of faith in free men, in the unawareness that millions of tiny know-hows would naturally and miraculously form and cooperate to satisfy this necessity, the individual cannot help but reach the erroneous conclusion that mail can be delivered only by governmental masterminding. Testimony galore. If I, pencil, were the only item that could offer testimony on what men can accomplish when free to try, then those with little faith would have a fair case. However, there is testimony galore. It's all about us, and on every hand. Mail delivery is exceedingly simple when compared, for instance, to the making of an automobile, or a calculator, or a grain combine, or a milling machine, or to tens of thousands of other things. The lesson I have to teach is this: leave all creative energies uninhibited. Merely organize society to act in harmony with this lesson. Let society's legal apparatus remove all obstacles the best it can. Permit these creative know-hows freely to flow. Have faith that free men will respond to the invisible hand. This faith will be confirmed. I, pencil, seemingly simple though I am, offer the miracle of my creation as testimony that this is a practical faith, as practical as the sun, the rain, a cedar tree, the good earth. Were we directed from Washington when to sow and when to reap, we should soon want bread. Thomas Jefferson, 1821. Chapter 16. Political Law. Dear Chris, now we'll get into political law. This is the law we have today. It is made-up law, created out of nothing. Whatever the power holders say is law, and if they change their minds, the law changes. During the 20th century, the entire world had been switching over to political law, and now the transition is almost complete. This transition has many causes. Perhaps the most important was the Great Depression of the 1930s. In those days, people didn't understand enough economics to know the depression was caused by inflation. You and many others understand this today, but only a handful knew it then. Not understanding the cause, they became desperate and frightened. They demanded their governments do something, anything, even if this meant a massive expansion of the use of force on persons who had not harmed anyone. Political law swept the world. In an attempt to stop the depression, governments flooded the earth with new laws. It was one legal experiment after another, with very little regard for the two fundamental laws. As you have probably already guessed, political law isn't just a different kind of law from the old common law. It is the opposite. It is based on political power, on brute force, not on the two fundamental laws. It's crude and primitive. Political law has no requirement for logic or morality. It changes whenever the political wind changes. Fickle and tangled, no one understands it. Democracy or dictatorship, it doesn't matter. Political law is arbitrary. You do whatever the power holders say, or else, even if it's morally wrong. This is why majority rule has so often become mob rule. Remember the reign of terror growing out of the French Revolution? The Salem witch trials? The U.S. government's slaughter of the Native Americans? The majority is as human as any dictator. Like the dictator, they do not vote for what is right. They vote for what they want. Their wants change constantly, so political law has no stability. It destroys investors' and businessmen's ability to plan ahead. Economic progress becomes very difficult. Imagine trying to play a game of baseball while the audience is voting every few minutes to change the rules. This is the situation employers and investors are in now. How the law has changed. In 1897, Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. defined law as systemized prediction. He said, "The prophecies of what the courts will do, in fact, and nothing more pretentious, are what I mean by the law." Now, no one has the slightest idea what the courts will do. The law changes daily. America's founders understood the dangers of political law. James Madison asked in the Federalist Papers, "What prudent merchant will hazard his fortunes in any new branch of commerce when he knows not that his plans may be rendered unlawful before they can be executed?" When merchants do not hazard their fortunes, new businesses are not created, and workers are not hired. we get more unemployment and poverty. A recent survey by the Conference Board, a group of 3,600 organizations in more than 50 nations, reports that for fear of civil liability, 47% of U.S. manufacturers have withdrawn products from the market. 25% of U.S. manufacturers have discontinued some forms of product research. Approximately 15% of U.S. companies have laid off workers as a direct result of product liability experience. Wall Street Journal, August 14, 1991. The American Revolution was fought over the difference between scientific law and political law. Government officials had been expanding their encroachment into the private businesses, lives, and property of the colonists. The colonists said the officials had no right to do this. All men are created equal. God has given no one special permission to encroach on others. No one, not even government officials. Thomas Jefferson. The general spread of the light of science has already laid open to every view the palpable truth that the mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God. In one of the earlier attempts to state the two fundamental laws, Jefferson made this remark in 1809. Reading, reflection, and time have convinced me that the interests of society require the observation of those moral precepts only in which all religions agree, for all forbid us to murder, steal, plunder, or bear false witness. The founders believed the principles of the old common law were superior to political law. After the Revolution, they created the Bill of Rights and other documents based on these ancient principles. The goal was to make the superiority of these principles permanent and to keep officials restrained by them. But during this century, the restraints have been broken. All we have left is political law. We are forced to do whatever the voters or their elected representatives say. Chris, this is a good place to introduce an extremely important clergyman named Jonathan Mayhew, whom President John Adams called a transcendent genius. In 1750, Mayhew gave a sermon that Adams said was read by everybody. The sermon was a deep exploration of religious principles relating to the authority of human governments. In it, Mayhew described what the government was doing and pointed out that this violated higher law. He told the audience that a king's authority is legitimate when the king obeys higher law, but when the king turns tyrant and makes his subjects his prey to devour and to destroy instead of his charge to defend and cherish, we are bound to throw off our allegiance to him and to resist. Mayhew pulled no punches. We may safely assert that no civil rulers are to be obeyed when they enjoin things that are inconsistent with the commands of God. All commands running counter to the declared will of the supreme legislator of heaven and earth are null and void, and therefore disobedience to them is a duty, not a crime. Not just the king, no civil rulers, said Mayhew, are to be obeyed if their rules are inconsistent with the commands of God. According to John Adams, this sermon was the real beginning of the American Revolution. It showed the people that they had to choose between their God's law and their government's law. Fortunately, enough had the courage to choose the path Adams chose, and this led to the creation of the most free and prosperous nation ever seen on earth. President John Quincy Adams once explained that the virtue which had been infused into the Constitution of the United States and was to give to its vital existence was that it would be always subordinate to a rule of right and wrong, and always responsible to the supreme ruler of the universe. Americans today sometimes assume the founders' references to God or nature or the supreme ruler were just for impact or for propaganda. Not so. These were tightly reasoned statements of legal principles. Your rights to your life, liberty, and property came from your Creator, not the government. These rights cannot be repealed. The legislative has no right to absolute arbitrary power over the lives and fortunes of the people. Nor can mortals assume a prerogative not only too high for men, but for angels, and therefore reserved for the exercise of the deity alone. Samuel Adams, Rights of the Colonists, November 20th, 1772. Chris, in my next letter, I'll tell you more about the differences between political law and scientific law, or common law. Until then, remember 2 points. 1. Political law has no requirement for logic or morality. And 2, it changes any time power holders wish to change it, which means constantly. We cannot plan ahead. Uncle Eric. If there is a single reason for my immigration to the U.S., it would be the 2 complementing documents of the Constitution and Bill of Rights. I am always surprised by my fellow citizens born in America because they take these documents for granted and do not put those principles into practice. I have traveled and studied in more than 50 countries. I always come back to the U.S., and I'm glad to come home. Nothing's better than home. America. Makram Saman, originally from Egypt. Letter to the Sacramento Bee newspaper, published August 4th, 1991.